So I want to make a quick video on how to graph square root inequalities. Like, I know these are equations, but let's pretend that instead of an equal sign, there was a less than symbol, okay? So we're going to go through the same steps. You identify h and k. Your h value is 0. Your k value is -2. So the h being 0 means that you don't shift left or right, but the -2 on k means you're going to shift 2 down, okay? And just like on parabolas, the hk was the most important point of a parabola. Right here, hk is the most important point of a square root function. So the hk value is 0, -2. So once you identify hk, you could ignore hk and just pretend it's a regular equation. You go to an input-output table, and you think of nice input values that will work with the square root. Like, for example, the square root of 0 is 0. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 4 is 2. And the square root of 9 is 3. So from there, you would plot the points 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, and 9, 3. And then you shift all those coordinates 2 units down because the k value is -2. So take all those points, move them 2 units down, right there, right there, right there, and up there, and there's your graph. Now, like I said, if it were an inequality, if it were an equal sign, yeah, you just draw it there with an arrow and you're done. But if it's an inequality, you've got to ask yourself, does the inequality have a solid line underneath it? And in this case, it does not have a solid line underneath it. So that means this is not going to be a solid graph. It's going to be a dotted graph. So you'd put like dots between your dots. And then after that, you need a shade either above that dotted curve or below that dotted curve according to your inequality. So if you do have a less than symbol, then you would be shading below, right? So I'm going to take a highlighter, a red highlighter, and I'm going to shade below that dotted curve. So I would shade everything that is below, like that. Now, if this would have been a greater than symbol, then I would be shading directly above, okay? If it were a less than or equal to, then that wouldn't be a dotted line anymore, dotted curve anymore. It would be a solid curve, a less than or equal to. If I had a solid line underneath, that would be a solid curve. Does that make sense? Yeah? All right. So that's a quick video. It's the same exact thing as before. It's kind of like graphing inequality lines, where you graph your line, and if it's a less than, you shade below. If it's a greater than, you shade above. Same thing, but right here you're graphing the curve, and if it's a less than, you shade below. If it's a greater than, you shade above. Do you guys want to try another? Okay, so I just made this inequality up right now. It does have a reflection over the x-axis. It does get vertically stretched by 2. It gets shifted 1 to the right because you think opposite of what you see, and 5 up. All right, so I could actually go through all those transformations and already have a good idea of what it looks like by reflecting, stretching, moving 1 to the right and 5 up. But we're going to stick with the steps. Step 1 is to identify h and k. H is what? 1. And k is what? 5. K is 5, h is 1. So h being 1 means you're going to go 1 unit to the right. K being +5, you're going to go 5 units up. So once you identify h and k, you could ignore h and k, pretend it's an equation, and make a quick xy table for the equation. Even though it's an inequality, we're going to pretend it's an equation. So imagine it says y equals -2 times the square root of x. Again, you want to plug in numbers here. Again, we're ignoring h and k. Just plug in numbers here that are perfect square root numbers. So you'd have to plug in something like 0, because the square root of 0 is 0, and then 0 times -2 is 0. Let's plug in another perfect square number like 1. And when you plug in a 1 right there, the square root of 1 is 1 times -2 is -2. Plug in another perfect square number like 4. Plug in 4 right there. The square root of 4 is 2. 2 times -2 is -4. Plug in another perfect square number like 9. 9 right there. Square root of 9 is 3, and 3 times -2 is -6. And of course, you could plug in more perfect square numbers, but those are all the ones that fit nicely on this 10 by 10 graph. So we're going to graph the point 0, 0. go up to the next coordinate 1, negative 2, 1 on the x, negative 2 on the y. There it is. Go to the next coordinate 4, negative 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 1, 2, 3, 4. There it is. And the last one, 9, negative 6, 9, negative 6. Let me see, where is it at? 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right there. So here is my graph that is only involving the a value of negative 2 with the parent graph, with the graph y equals negative 2 square root of x. But we still need to do a h shift and a k shift to all these coordinates to get to our final point. So we're going to shift all these coordinates 1 to the right and 5 up according to h and k. So 1 to the right and 5 up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry about that. Took me a little bit longer. And then the next coordinate, 1 to the right and 5 up, will be right here. And the next coordinate, 1 to the right and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will be right there. And the last one, 1 to the right and 5 up, will be right here. 1 to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. So the red dots is the final graph that I want, not the blue dots, because the red dots have been shifted. Now, in addition to that, let's first ask ourselves, does this have a solid line underneath it? No, it does not. So this is not going to be a solid curve going this way. Okay, it's going to be a dotted curve. So put some dots between the dots, or some dashes. We do not put an arrow over here because that's the beginning point. That's your HK point, the most important point, the HK. And we need to shade either above or below. This is a less than symbol, so we're going to be shading below. So a lot of students get confused with this. The bottom line is this point right here, you're going to shade below that point. So it's going to be a line coming down like this. So if you're using a highlighter, you would just put your dot going up to that point and then coming straight down like this. Then everything below is also going to be shaded. And that's how you graph. Now, if it would have been a greater than symbol, you'd be shading everything above, up here, and not down here, if it were a greater than symbol. Now, what if this would have been an or equal to? As a matter of fact, let's make it an or equal to. The only difference is that if you do have a solid line, then this has to become solid. So you would actually graph it. Whoops. Shouldn't have erased it. You should just graph it solid, which would be like this, solid. If this was an or equal to, which I made it an or equal to, so now it's solid. What do you think? Easy peasy? So even though I didn't spend too much time on this, this will be on the practice quiz for this week and on the quiz for this week.